Of all the visual styles in gaming, I think pixel art has to be one of my favorites. There's just something beautiful about these crunchy little squares. They're simple, readable, and also largely accessible for game creators who might not have as much practical knowledge in places like 2D art to make assets for their game. One of the best examples of this is Toby Fox, who, especially at the time of Undertale, just wasn't particularly technically skilled in 2D drawing, although I think he's great at creative creature design. Many of Undertale's characters were Toby designs. There are posts of his concept art for both Undertale and Deltarune online, and they're really cool to look at. I'd suggest you do. He's worked with a few different creators over the years, mainly Temmie Chang, but there are also guest artists and concept designers like GGDG, Canotines, Chess, Splendid Land, who also made that great fake game Apple Quest, by the way, which is crazy to me. I didn't know they did concept art for Deltarune. And of course many others. Like Gerson, who Google credits as a music artist on the game. I've been curious about pixel art for a long time. I actually did my first game jam a bit ago and downloaded a sprite to poke around and do a bit of learning. A big part of this process was studying the work of some of my favorite pixel artists like 6VCR, Goodgis, and Plastaboo. But also looking at games I'm inspired by, like Celeste, late-era pixel Pokemon games, Off, Baba Is You, and, of course, Deltarune. As Deltarune's developed over the years, its art has gotten better and better, especially in the new character animations in places like Tenna's minigames. And I thought it would be fun to take a look through the sprites and see what I could learn from them as an artist. Sprites are hard. Small sprites especially so. While some characters will have the opportunity for bigger portraits or shop sprites, most of what comes on screen cannot afford to be that size. So things need to be compressed. There are a few standard character shapes most games go with to achieve this. Deltarune does not do this. One of the things I admire most about Deltarune is the sheer variety of shapes it uses in its design. While some characters do lean to the anthropomorphic side, there are so many unique silhouettes and interesting shapes. Deltarune is never afraid to exaggerate and be a little silly. There is sort of a general fear in art I see of having anything come across as ugly, because you love the characters and want other people to be connected to them too. But Deltarune pushes expression and features all the time, and it makes its monsters really endearing to me. Actually, some of its most popular characters are very unconventional. Spamton and Tenna share these ice cream noses, and Jevils just plain weird in a very fun way. By far my favorites are some of the enemies when they can just get silly with them. Bibliox, Pop-Up, Shutta, and I know they're not enemies, but the Cuptons have my heart. The first chapter especially has a lot of shapes in mind with its creature designs, with such heavy theming around game pieces and specifically the suits of cards. Mr. Society, the Rudins, Pippins, and Hathies, the Starwalker bird, Clover, and of course Lancer and his dad all fall into card suit theming. You can really see it in sprites like Hathi. I love this hurt sprite's stupid teeth. And I really admire this sort of thing. For how on the nose it can be in places, there is a certain kind of whimsy to this that I absolutely love. Detail is hard at such a small scale. Any kind of art will tell you that. You have to prioritize certain elements and create something that will connect with your audience and be recognizable at scale. Every pixel counts. And here, they are drawn so expressive and full of life, with little expressions and animations that make them feel like real characters. I wanted to help the Cuptons, these tiny armless creatures so dedicated to making the climb despite constantly falling and failing, with their stupid wiggle up the towers. I wanted to engage in their story, and so when they show up later to help you, I was weirdly emotionally impacted by these determined creatures doing their best for you. Because their wiggle animation was funny. Or the Pippins, characters who initially fell a bit more flat in the design area for me, until the green Pippin shows up and pulls out his conspiracy board while looking at you like this, and there is so much energy in these faces. It legitimately got a full-on laugh out of me the first time I saw them do it. I think overall as a chapter, the Cyberworld has the best NPC and enemy design. Not because I dislike any of the other chapter's enemies, Cuptons for life, but because they don't serve the same purpose. Outside of boss enemies like Elnina and Lenino or Jackenstein, by the way, I need a plush of D. Pumpkin Jackenstein, this is the best thing I have ever seen, they were designed to exist a bit more in the background or as NPCs to carry the story. 3 uses very limited amounts of actual enemies. It's mostly just shadow guys on the actual playing field, but it uses what they do have very well with a lot of personality. It's the first game to get me to care about a water cooler. 4 as a whole has a much more chill and ominous vibe, and the level of silly that Deltarune usually pulls would feel out of place and tonally distracting. Sort of like if Undertale's True Lab was also the place you fought Mad Mew Mew. So we get creatures like Baltha Lizard and Wingblade most of the time, and then occasionally have the gloom broken by Jackenstein's adorable tippy taps. Something I particularly love about Chapter 2 is actually the way it uses colors, both in its world, which I love, but I am personally terrible at environment design, so I do not feel confident that I could explain why without sounding like a crazy person. But I have taken color theory classes, and this makes me happy. Cyberworld primarily uses greens, blues, pinks, and yellows to give off almost the effect of one of those Tokyo at night pictures. Considering the futuristic neon city aesthetic is sometimes called cyberpunk, yeah, this makes sense to me. Deltarune makes some pretty great use of color. Some personal favorites from this zone are Pop-Up and Wearwire. Pop-Up is actually pretty unique because of the way it handles its outlines. Now, I know outlines are a small thing to be pointing out here, but they do make a big difference. Interestingly to me, many of the Light World characters, particularly the ones who previously appeared in Undertale, tend to have pure black line work. Some Dark World characters do too, of course, but they'll often make use of colored internal lines or different line styles, like how the Shadow Guys have white outlines to separate them from the void of battle. The Addisons and Spamton actually outline themselves in gray, which I never really noticed until I made this video, and now I cannot unnotice this. And then characters like Mizzle and the K-Rounds will use it for texture. A hard black line would make no sense on a water creature. Usually these sort of fit along with the general colors of the character and don't come across as too jarring. Pop-Up does not care. It outlines its bright blue body in red and is proud of it. And I know it isn't a traditional example of the way Deltarune handles sprites, but I wanted to point this one out because of what an interesting effect I think it adds to the little fellow. It's not just a harsh red, it's broken up and dotted all over the sprite, mainly being used for interior lines. This keeps it from being too overwhelming, considering it already features quite a bit on the inside of the mouth and on its little spring leg warmer situations. I think the reason it's so different is that it wasn't designed by Toby or Temmie at all, and was instead a contribution of Splendid Lands, whose original concept art had less red, but also featured bright green in the outline, which looks great in the drawing, but on the sprite would have been probably too many colors. Something looking at Deltarune's characters has taught me is that the sprites look best when you've got a small library of well-used colors. The Pop-Up actually only has 4, and I think removing the green for it was the right choice. The sprites in Cyberworld actually tend to share a library of basic colors. Not the exact same shades, but, you know, sort of the same zone. The red extending to the blush on this character, or the fact that the purple of the back leg comes back on the Wear-Wire. It makes for an ultimately more cohesive cast of enemies, and it looks great. Speaking of colors, the outline thing I mentioned was something that I went down a much bigger rabbit hole for than I initially expected. I actually find this really interesting. One thing I wanted to understand a bit more was why certain sprites felt flatter to me than others, so that I could, you know, explain that in this video. But I noticed what a big role the outlines have to play in it. When we have that thick black outline on its own, it can feel even more like a 2D drawing than the medium kinda already makes your brain think. A lot of Undertale's characters do this. The battle sprites, for one, because they were just done in black and white, will mitigate this by giving the characters some fun motion. But the overworld sprites tend to come off a bit blockier. We can actually see the artists have pulled back for Deltarune. Asgore and Alphys are good examples because while they still have that black outer line, their clothes have been changed to having lineless or colored lines on the inside, making them a bit softer and providing volume like how Asgore's arm hair does. Except Sans. Sans knows what he is. Sans has not changed a bit. He is Sans. The way line is handled changes a lot from sprite to sprite. From no lines at all to lines to color everywhere, there's plenty of beautiful experimentation that helps give each character their unique look. The last thing I think I should talk about is the playable characters. Chris, Ralsei, Susie, and, occasionally, Noelle. Unlike many of the enemy monsters, these characters have slightly more humanoid forms, or just like, are human. I really like all their defaults. I think for a character having a more neutral design as their base is a good idea, because, especially with how difficult communicating detail at scale can be, having a design that's easier to move for things like battle and exploration animations is a good idea. I also think it makes the moments with special unique sprites even cooler. Chris and the gang coming out in rockstar outfits during Chapter 3 made me unreasonably excited. Also, honorable mention to Susie and Azriel's church clothes, frazzled Chris with a hockey stick, and Horse Ralsei. The way what they choose to wear and how they wear it in a costume change tells me so much about who they are. Ralsei 100% sees mohawks as the ultimate rock and roll cool. Susie's dino onesie might have been based off a set of pajamas when she was a kid and played this game, even if it isn't necessarily a change in costume, the way Chris gets much more frazzled and expressive when we aren't in control, still hits with that same impact considering how used to the neutral expression we've gotten by the point it gets to come out. Things like this is what makes characters real, even if it's just what onesie they would choose to wear if given the option. There is a tremendous amount of work that goes into creating any art, much less polishing it into a finished product. Pixel art as a whole, I think, isn't given enough credit because it is an old style of video game art. Limitation did basically force us into it back in the days of Pong and Frogger, so some companies see it as outdated, an era of that time. We get things like Pokemon remasters where all their beautiful, chunky lines and well-considered compositions are 3D modeled out of the original charm that they held, because 3D is seen as more current and higher tech. And I find that a shame. Looking over these sprites and seeing just how important every single pixel is to the final effect only made me appreciate the sheer effort that goes into these projects more. So I hope you enjoyed my little dig through it. That'll be all for me today. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out. Thanks for watching, and good night.